Welcome to Darkwood Brew, a convergent point where people of faith and spiritual seekers come together to seek inspiration, support, conversation, and inspiration for our journeys together in the Darkwood. Tonight we're here talking about Solomon's story tonight as we follow the narrative lectionary. I'm here with Eric Illness and Scott Grissel, our producer for Darkwood Brew. And, you know, this whole Solomon story thing is up and down, right? We have some people that say that King Solomon may very well be the best king ever, and then other people who say maybe not.
Maybe the worst king ever.
Maybe.
That's right. Well,
at least
not
possible.
to let you decide tonight.
Yeah. So there's a story to be told about how Solomon's story comes in lots of different layers.
Yeah, you know, Chris, thanks first. It's great to be here tonight.
Yeah,
Thank
good.
you. And I always enjoy being on the show.
Nice to have you.
We, you know, interestingly enough, we were having a conversation this morning because we do these meetings before the show. People might be surprised to know that we actually put some thought into this before it happens.
May not appear like that, folks, but
We do plan things.
And we do this a little bit where we kind of sit around and just sort of check in and talk to each other.
Sure.
And Eric brought a program that he had that that really what this does is it takes sort of classic rock and roll and probably other songs too.
Yeah,
I think
yeah,
you brought in a Yes song and a Rush
Yeah,
song.
yeah.
And it breaks them down. Yeah, that's right. And it breaks them down by track. Probably, you know, one of the things that if somebody was in a band and they were doing covers, they'd be able to go in
so
and
like
kind of...
the guitar track or the drum track, the vocal
Right.
track, the background vocal track, and all that. Yeah,
And they're
That was really
actually...
cool.
yeah it is.
And they're actually...
It's called Jam It.
They're actually using the real tracks from,
Yes,
from the
the
music.
real tracks,
so,
yes.
and not just sort of going in and ripping that back out, but they're going back into some of those mixes
masters,
and taking
yeah.
it back into the masters. And it got me thinking about the music that Nominally Brennett did for our show, our theme song. And it's the last thing on the timer. So if you were listening to the timer, if you were on a little bit before the show started tonight, you got it. And also it plays at the end of our show and in the opening credits. So we're really just such amazing music, and Nominally such a great artist from Tucson, where I'm from. So it's really just exciting that we can use her music. And I was thinking about the fact that I have, because when we were working with her to put the music together, you know, we were sort of working with her and listening to tracks. And
You got
things.
the tracks.
We have the tracks. So, and we don't even need Jam It to go back and listen to the
That's
tracks. I think there's going to be a metaphor in here somewhere, but before we get to the metaphor,
I think there might be.
something
It
tells
might be
me.
leading to something.
So why don't we go ahead and in the back room, why don't we have Dinah and Pat and Nick roll that first clip from Nominally. And what we're going to hear when this starts to play is like, it's just basically that, you know, it's the first track and then a second track that she laid in over the top of that, which is the Mellotron. And we're just really, I mean, it's just, we're starting to kind of get to a theme. It's one sort of piece of the whole picture.
Laying the groundwork.
We're laying the groundwork for this. So, and from here, let's go ahead now and take a look, or take a listen to that second clip. Basically, what's happening? Just one more thing is laying over the top, and it's the strings, but it really changes the nature.
Yeah, it does.
of
I
the whole
didn't even
piece.
notice they were there before.
Really changes the nature, and then we'll take a listen to how this whole thing came together as a full piece of music, and that includes Nominally's voice that comes in over the top, all the strings and everything else that's happening in there, and it really, I mean, and now all of a sudden the song has a real voice as kind of a cohesive piece.
In the middle of the forest.
On top of being just a great piece
a
of
great
music.
piece
Oh, it's great, yeah.
So,
Walk through the dark wood.
absolutely.
Now I can appreciate the strings, I think.
Yeah, and isn't it something, I mean, you go back, and I'm not particularly musical, and so for me to actually even kind of do like we were doing with Jam It, which is sort of go back through it and listen to the different pieces, I mean, you really get kind of a sense of the artistry
Yeah, it's a
there.
much fuller
Yeah.
picture,
Yeah.
I think.
You appreciate the
Sound.
larger whole when you
Right,
can kind of
right.
understand its component working parts.
Absolutely. Which puts me in mind of some conversations that the three of us have had, and that particularly some things that you guys have kind of taught me about a little bit, which is how the Bible came together in some cases in a way that's really similar to that, because
Yeah.
it was a number of different sort of instruments or voices
Absolutely.
that are being pulled together. So what do you guys have to say about that?
Yeah, well, throughout Christian history, basically we had the received text of the Bible, and it was basically like having the final mix was given. And now the rabbis always kind of picked up on this, like, hey, wait a minute, there's some other voices going on here. They're like, what's going on? But really, it wasn't until kind of the era of modern scholarship that they've actually kind of like the program Jammet occurs, comes out for the Bible, where we actually begin to develop tools to kind of take away some of these layers and actually realize that there's actually a lot of different layering in the biblical text. A single story, when you get into like the books of 1st and 2nd Samuel, the book of 1st and 2nd Kings, it's been evident that there's a multitude of voices. There's and some of them are not always in harmony with each other. And so if you examine, especially if you get down below the surface of the text and look at the Hebrew, for instance, the use of language, motifs that occur, and so forth, you can actually start to tease out different tracks, so to speak. And so you kind of have a base storyline, like in our text tonight. With Solomon, there's clearly this base storyline that has melody line, but then over time, as literally communities centuries after it was written was reflecting on this story and its significance for their day and saying, we have some insight here too. They kind of add a layer to a track, so to speak. They lift up the voice of one piece of the story that had been more muted before, tone something down. It's really kind of fascinating. And the object isn't simply to pick apart all these things and say, oh, gee whiz, we picked it apart, but actually to understand those different layers and then put them back together. And you appreciate, the whole more than you did before. It's like, oh, I never realized that, I never heard those strings before. They were always there, but I hadn't heard them,
And that tradition comes alive for you because as you parse them out, you're able to distinguish like the priestly tradition from another tradition, and you'll know what context it's in. So it broadens the whole picture for you, so the story comes alive in a more meaningful way.
Yeah, and speaks across the centuries.
Right.
So we'll be getting into that tonight.
Sure, we will.
Right.
But before we get into all that, let's take a look at the foundations that got us to this point.
It's not like God flashes neon signs and says, here's what it means to be in relationship with me, and here's where I'm calling you, just look over to the flashing dot, or something like that, follow the bouncing ball, and there's your path. This is about clearing out the static, getting quiet, trying to discern the still small voice, those hints of intuitions, those aha moments, those light bulb kind of things, those times when things click into place, suggesting the next step forward and stuff. And it's not a precise science. None of us ever get it right 100% of the time. The decisions we make matter, and because they matter, it's really, really, really important that when we discover we've made a wrong decision, to acknowledge it, turn around, come back, and do a new thing. And what Yahweh proves throughout the whole Old Testament is that when you do that, things tend to go far better. That Yahweh is far more forgiving and loving than we ever imagined.
Now tonight we have Melvin Brew with us tonight. He's such full of energy.
Oh
it's
my
a lot
gosh.
of fun to have around.
Darkwood Brew favorite.
Yeah, so we're excited about that. He's going to help us dig into this story of Solomon a little bit deeper. But we have a lot of guests coming up that are going to help this whole series just deepen and come alive, I think. Next week we have Rachel Heckenberg who is with us, and she has been showing up all over the place.
Yeah, it seems like I see her name everywhere.
Yeah.
She's a minister. She's now at the National Office of the United Church of Christ. She's helping out with the Center for Progressive Renewal, and she's got a book coming out. And yeah,
she's a busy lady.
Yeah, and really representative of kind of a young generation of ministers who are really very much theologically broad and inclusive, and yet spiritually deep. It's really exciting. Yeah.
I'm excited to meet her. The week after that, we have Frank Schaefer, who's with us, and that's always going to be fun. We're going to be talking about the
patience.
Pillar of patience.
Frank Schaefer and patience. It'll be fun.
Start working on that now, Frank. That'll be great.
Yeah. I don't know if Frank even knows he's going to be talking about patience. We haven't dared to tell him yet.
And then after that, we have Rolf Jacobson, who is going to be with us, who's one of the co-creators of the Narrative Lectionary altogether.
Luther Seminary. So we've got a great slate.
Yeah, so that's a lot of fun. Rachel's book that is coming out, I think it comes out in December, doesn't it?
I think so.
And it's called Sacred Pause, and she does a look at old things in a new creative way in order to kind of reclaim them and bring them back to life. I'm looking forward to reading that.
It's really kind of a journey of mindfulness. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and there's a lot to be said in the church for, reclaiming old stuff.
Yeah.
I think that'll be really nice. So I'm looking forward to that. So she has some surprising stuff to say about the pillar of humility, inspiring stuff, I think.
Yeah, we talked to her this morning. It was great, yeah.
So be sure and be with us next week as we do that. But one of the things that we do always with these narrative lectionary stories is we ask each story what we call a thorny theological question. So Eric, what is our thorny theological question this week?
You roll that drum roll track. Okay, here it is. This is an interesting one, actually. Actually, I don't see. They're always interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, here we go. If God offered to give you one thing, one thing, what would you ask for?
Wow.
Simple, but what would you? Oh, yeah. That's a big question.
That would be a question that we can get into a little bit deeper as soon as we hear what the initial story is.
Yeah, that's right.
So let's turn to our Pneuma Divina and let's listen to Dinah.
1 Kings chapter 3, verses 4 through 28.
The king went to Gibeon to sacrifice there, for that was the principal high place. Solomon used to offer 1,000 burnt offerings on that altar. At Gibeon the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant, my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart towards you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David, although I am only a little child. I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil. For who can govern this your great people?" And it pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. God said to him, "Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches, or for the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor all your life. No other king shall compare with you. If you walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and my commandments, as your father David walked, then will I lengthen your life." Then Solomon awoke. It had been a dream. He came to Jerusalem, where he stood before the ark of the covenant of the Lord. He offered up burnt offerings and offerings of well-being, and provided a feast for all his servants. Later, 2 women who were prostitutes came to the king and stood before him. The one woman said, "Please, my lord, this woman and I live in the same house, and I gave birth while she was in the house. Then, on the 3rd day after I gave birth, this woman also gave birth. We were together. There was no one else with us in the house. Only the 2 of us were in the house. Then this woman's son died in the night because she lay on him. She got up in the middle of the night and took my son from beside me while your servant slept. She laid him at her breast and laid her dead son at my breast. When I rose in the morning to nurse my son, I saw that he was dead. But when I looked at him closely in the morning, clearly it was not the son I had borne. But the other woman said, 'No, the living son is mine, and the dead son is yours.' The first said, 'No, the dead son is yours, and the living son is mine.' So they argued before the king. Then the king said, 'The one says, "This is my son that is alive, and your son is dead," while the other says, "Not so. Your son is dead, and my son is the living one." So the king said, "Bring me a sword," and they brought a sword before the king. The king said, "Divide the living boy in 2, and give half to the one, and half to the other." But the woman whose son was alive said to the king, because compassion for her son burned within her, Please, my lord, give her the living boy. Certainly do not kill him. The other said, It shall be neither mine nor yours. Divide it. Then the king responded, Give the first woman the living boy. Do not kill him. She is his mother. All Israel heard of the judgment that the king had rendered, and they stood in awe of the king, because they perceived that the wisdom of God was in him to execute justice.
This is the place where we are coming back from having lost just a couple minutes of our feed tonight. So
Yes, they kind of went like that out on the internet, and we lost
don't
a few
know
minutes
if that's
of
God talking to us or not.
getting to Melvin. So we're actually recording this part after the Darkwood Brew show appeared earlier this evening. So we're just gonna record a bit until we get to Melvin, pick up with Melvin. So
Right.
pardon our construction here, but let's just take a pause and get into it.
So our thorny theological question is, if God offered to give you one thing, what would you ask for? So I'm going to ask you that question. What would that one thing be?
Oh man, I actually, from talking to Melvin earlier, it's like earlier today he was like, what would you ask for? And Melvin's like, I don't have a clue. It's like, that's probably the wisest answer you can have there. When you're standing in the face of the Almighty, the creator of the universe, whose wisdom far surpasses your own, it's like, how could you not feel anything but small and insignificant and like you don't know nothing? And how would you even know what to ask for in the presence of such a one? And so I think I'd go with Melvin on that one. But really, that's kind of where Solomon comes out too. I mean, he has this dream in which God appears to him and asking that question, and there must have been this sense of intuition, like, I don't know nothing in the face of this God, and I don't even know if I know anything anymore. Give me wisdom. I'll take that. Give me some handle on how to grasp this. What's real. And how I can lead this people who suddenly I don't feel like I have any capacity to do so whatsoever now that I'm in the presence of this amazing consciousness.
Well, when you're standing before God, which I can't even imagine. I mean, it's that, what would you possibly say? But it's also, at that point, what would the natural question be to say, I don't even know what to ask. Give me the wisdom to know what to ask. Yeah. And so in that sense, the wisdom piece comes out quite a bit. Mm-hmm. But in this whole Solomon story, there is that bass track. Mm-hmm. When we get back to our music metaphor that we were working with, you said there was a basic track that runs all the way through the Solomon story. Yes. And I would say that it's this sense of wisdom, right?
Absolutely.
That is that bass track. So what exactly is that bass track made up of? What's the nature of Solomon's wisdom in this?
The wisdom piece, that question really sets this track in motion. So what's going to happen then is this is going to be this base layer is going to demonstrate what wisdom means in Solomon's life and in his career as for 40 years as a king. And so it starts right away. With suddenly you're cutting into a layer that's saying now he had to judge between these two prostitutes. Which child is which. And that's going to then reveal the nature, where he's coming at wisdom from. And I think it's extraordinary, actually, the judgment he uses. I mean, it's like, God, I wouldn't have thought of that. And how does he do it? The storyteller tells us, he's drawing on compassion. He sensed the compassion of the mother there, and that word in Hebrew is kind of intriguing. The word compassion that we translate as compassion is rachamim, which is the plural of racham, which means womb. That's the plural of womb. That doesn't mean like multiple wombs. That's the way Hebrew then points to an abstract principle based on a concrete thing. So what it's saying is, Solomon sensed, responded from the sense of wombishness. It's like he could connect with compassion, that sense from a true mother, like, I am connected to this child, and Solomon felt connected to this situation and these people,
base creative
could sense that, and lift out that and which revealed the true mother. And I think that's really, I mean, as the story goes, that's what Solomon does. he seems to have had this extraordinary sense of being able to connect with people on a deep level that draws them out to, this charisma really that makes you say, oh, he's calling forth the best in me. He's calling something wonderful in me, and I want to be part of that,
right.
And so he uses that to tremendous benefit. So as this track continue to listen to this track, on Solomon, it's talking about immediately he's making inroads with people who used to be enemies. Like it's almost like he's determined I'm going to be the opposite of my father. I mean, like any son, good son does. Yeah. David, his father. David. I mean, I don't think he thought. David was considered a great king, but David was also considered a man of war. And I think Solomon has concluded, I'm going to use my wisdom to create peace and to rule by peace. And so he starts making these alliances with these people who had been dead enemies of Israel. Right. For instance, he enters a marriage alignment with the Ammonites. Well, last week we were talking about how David sent a raiding party to besiege their capital city, and tear it down, And now in one generation, Solomon has built a bridge between these enemies who had ravaged Israel for so long through and a marriage alliance, and he continues in these different marriage alignments between, again, traditional enemies of Israel. The scripture goes on to talk about how he expands the borders of Israel to really the fullest extent that it had ever been. So full that scholars would continually say there's no way it could have been that big. But I mean that's what the track is telling us. His wisdom, he was able to create alliances, create peace, and also along with it then extraordinary wealth. Extraordinary wealth. Whenever you had peace in Israel, you had wealth. It was a land bridge between two superpowers who had to cross through Israel in order to trade. Yeah, and so when there was warfare, the land bridge broke down. You didn't have the trade, and you didn't have the commerce, you didn't have the taxation and stuff. So when that land bridge was open, there was peace. The money you were rolling in it, And Solomon, his wisdom, recognized that, and so it brought this tremendous wealth into the country too. So that track, as it plays, you're thinking, man, I'm resonating with this track. You can have peace, you can have wealth, you can have prosperity. This is pretty good. Track A is awesome.
That is awesome. But as you expand into other cultures, into greater trade with your neighbors, right? You're expanding a sense of yourself to the point where there are more and more people involved, and somewhere in the midst of that, Solomon has lost track in some way of himself and his own identity, because there's another track that runs alongside that wisdom track, right? A little bit darker side.
Not everybody's going to be thinking like, this is the greatest thing in the world. Like this is the tune. There are people who are hearing other things in Solomon's story and have a little different perspective on this, track B, kind of thing.
Yeah, and to this second track, this would be a great place for Melvin to jump in and join us in this conversation.
It becomes that track that kind of starts to erode the original track of this wisdom, where Solomon gets caught up in a different way of being in the world, and you start to see him act out of ways of being in the world where he adopts virtues that we wouldn't normally attach to Yahweh's story. He adopts ways of interacting with people that seem far afield from this original act of wisdom between these two women, where he helps them. He helps bring out the voice of the true mother, the true compassion, and he enters in these other ways of being in the world that are not full of compassion, that are not full of humility, that are not full of wisdom and obedience to Yahweh.
Yeah. So you run track A, and you hear wise. He's making these alliances between former enemies. He's expanded the borders of Israel now to the fullest extent that they were ever in their history. In fact, the Bible claims such a huge territory for Israel that most scholars say, oh, that's impossible. It couldn't have been that successful. The wealth that's flowing into Israel is just mind-blowing. He builds the temple to Yahweh now, this huge, expansive temple that would become a foundation stone in Israel. And there's this long list of the huge timbers, the cedar timbers and the gold and the bronze that were used for this temple. It makes your head spin. It's like they were building like the CERN super collider writer, of their day. In Jerusalem, Solomon's got all these raw materials coming in, and you're thinking, wow, this guy in his wisdom, he's accomplished so much. Yeah. But then there's this little other track that comes in, and by the way, he conscripted, he used forced Israelite labor for this. Oh, and by the way, he enslaved some other people from other countries to build all this stuff. You're thinking, wait a minute. A Hebrew enslaving some other people? Weren't they slaves? Think something's wrong here. And how is Israel now? It says he didn't make them slaves, but he made them conscripted labor. It's like, okay, I'll pay you a minimum wage. 2 cents. Whatever an hour. And like, is this still an Israelite king? You start wondering. Mm-hmm. So then, by the time you get to the end of his reign, this successful reign, he's reigned for 40 years. It's expansive territory with wealth that makes your head spin. As soon as his reign is done, the whole thing just collapses like a house of cards. Just collapses. And Israel splits then. The 10 tribes from the north split off, leaving the 2 tribes, among them Solomon's tribe, from the south. And that's it. And they will never be back together again. The united monarchy, that the Israel, as we know it, is in its full 12 tribes, literally does not last beyond the 10th century. Well before the 10th century will be over, there will be a divided Israel, and it will always be divided. It just this incredible, extraordinary stuff.
There's a point then when, if you try to include everybody all the time and understand them at all levels, that you've ended up spreading yourself so thin that you've lost your whole sense of self, which is what you were saying, Melvin. And then with that comes that split, right? A split happens when you spread yourself too thin, or your loyalties are divided between so many different gods out there and so many different people and their needs and their intents and their wishes for you, that your own identity gets sucked into that and you kind of forget. But there's that claiming of God, of Yahweh specifically. That was the original track of Solomon's story. So how does Solomon begin to ever discern? I mean, what's that role of the community that helps Solomon discern where that track is, where that claim of God is, that he can get back on track?
Kind of absent in the story.
Yeah,
really,
I was thinking about that this morning when we were talking about that the David and Nathan story had Nathan that helped him claim where his track was again, right? But there's more to claiming your God than just assenting to that your God is right? There's a way of being in the world that expresses what you believe. So.
Absolutely.
How do you respond to that? How does Solomon be able to discern where he is in that community? And how would that speak to who we are today? How do we get back on track?
Well, here again, you have this idea, Israel is this theocracy, so to speak. We were talking this morning about how, the other nations have a king, and their king is their God's representative on the earth. Mm-hmm. Whereas within Israel, God says, no, I'm God. And at best, your king is this type of foreman who's helping to build this representation, but you're all a part of this. I will be your God, is what God tells Israel in the when they're in the desert, and you will be my people. I will be your God, and you will be my people. And so if Solomon had remained true to his story, true to this track of wisdom that he found himself on initially, then he would have been in such relationship with the other people of Israel that he would have had those in the community who could speak into his story, and to remind him of the story. But sadly, we see him start to take on this role of king that's more closely associated with Pharaoh, that's more closely associated with these other kings, the kings of the Amalekites and the others around him, where he starts to distance himself from the people, where he starts to focus on what is it that I as king what wealth and resource can I acquire and build up for myself. And so his story so totally changes, right? And he surrounds himself with people who don't know this story. And so they can't remind him in it. I imagine some of his wives saw some of the issues that were going on, right? Some of the stuff that's falling apart. And they're like, well, if you just do this, if you just build me a temple, right, then I'll be able to worship my God, and then you'll have some other favor. He's grasping at this thing all along the way, and maybe that's some of what we hear in the story in the book of Ecclesiastes, as he's trying to remember. But he's removed himself from that possibility because he's divorced himself in so many ways from his story that he can't remember the story in a way that's meaningful
Yeah.
to him.
I think that's a kind of a painful story. There's so many modern implications to this story, so many ways it kind of holds up a mirror to society that it's kind of painful to read that story in many ways. Even like in a church, even just to take it down to a church setting, so many times just for a clergy person, there's like 10 different communities in the church. There's these people who say, I read the Bible literally, and I'm very, very conservative, and if the church is veering from that, I'm going to complain like crazy. And the clergy person kind of starts like, well, we got to please that community. And then I'm really liberal, and I don't believe that God speaks these days, and I think it'll all be about side blah blah. And I got to please this. And then there's people who say, well, I don't really take my faith too seriously. Don't ask too much of me, and I won't pledge. Okay. And so you take somebody who got into even ministry out of this pure passion and joy of the pursuit and the love and the grace and the expansiveness, and then they end up bowing down to 12 different communities, and then finally lose the sense of who are they even.
Right.
I think that's Solomon. Solomon is trying to please so many different communities by the time he went into this with great intentions and achieved a lot, grew, a great community and a wealthy community, but lost himself in the mix.
Wow.
Very much so. And this same theme kind of plays itself out in history over and over and over again. So you think about the intuition that births the United States. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all are created equal. Yeah. It's such a profound, deeply wise notion. All are created equal, and of course there's some revisionism there. All men are created equal, but it's this deeply wise theme, this deeply wise notion. But somehow, losing track of that thread, losing track of that story, we end up where we undermine it early in the birth of the nation with this idea that, okay, all are created equal, but some can be slaves, right? And so then that leads you a little bit further afield. And then, all are created equal, but men are a little more equal than women, right? And really what we were talking about white male landowners, right? So it's really the landowners who are, and so you keep parsing that thing and it, to where you lose what it is that you've been called into. You lose. So this theme kind of repeats itself over and over and over again, where there is maybe part of the lesson of the story of Solomon is a lesson about learn to be true to that which you've been called into. Learn to be true to who you are and whose you are, however you tell that story.
Amen.
Yeah, amen. In your unique conversation with life, right? Each person has their own calling to that, to that walk with life. Yeah, exactly. Well, using the community to help us keep on track, let's go to, we're going to go to the online community and get them to ask a question of us, and we'll be right back with our social media while we're gathering those questions, and then we'll come back to you. Okay, Melvin?
Good deal.
Great. Randy, do we have a question online?
We don't have a question, but we did get an interesting answer to the thorny theological question that from Zeus in the Philippines. He said the gift that he asked for was to know how his efforts fit into the larger arc of God's plan and God's time so that he might cooperate with greater awareness. Yeah. Yet
Lots of luck, Zeus.
Yeah.
Hope you're not holding your breath.
Yet the answer came to my heart, God is already doing that, but in steps as I am able.
There we go. There's
So what
wisdom.
I have asked for in my dearest is already being provided. The only thing missing is eternal perspective, which is not a human capacity.
Yeah, you know that's brilliant. Yeah, you know that reminds me a lot of something that David White once said. A poet. You know, he has this poem called "Start Close In." You know, he says, you know, we want to you have it all. We want to have big answers, but just give it time. Breathe a little bit. Start close in. Start with the question that you don't want to ask. That's very close into you. You want to see God's plan in the larger picture. Well, start close in. With that next step that you're meant to take, and that's what I hear in the second half of Zeus's comment. Very wise. Yeah.
That's what I was hearing in our discussion too, is the idea that we're in this huge, big globalization kind of a thing, but that whole wisdom behind think globally but act locally. One step at a time, start close in. What David White says a lot would be a good answer. And we have, like I said, we didn't get any responses to our thorny theological question when we asked it on Facebook, but we did get a blog from Ian Lynch, who's one of our bloggers, and he was talking about this whole idea about the role of the community. And he was saying how important it was for Nathan in the story with David to be able to call David to task for his role as the king and his role as being that person who could pull the unique voice out of people in his kingdom and be able to have them dig deep inside themselves for that discernment about what God's way is for them. And then he talked about our role in our communities, about how we are responsible to each other for that, but not to the point where we're beating each other over the head with Bibles saying how it ought to be, but rather, what is your unique voice? What is it that brings you joy out of your tradition? So I thought that was a really great blog that it's helpful even to our discussion this week as well, because that is, I think, the piece that's missing from the Solomon story, is that communal voice that holds us accountable to where that way is going. Yeah.
I think Tracy had a question.
So Tracy?
Online.
Actually, this is from In the Room, and we had some discussion in the room, and a question that came up is, so God says, "Ask what I should give you." How does Jesus answer that question?
That's a good thing we have Melvin here.
You're the storyteller.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, we always give you first shot. That's what it is. That's hospitality.
So how does Jesus answer the question, ask what I shall give you? Wow. So the one place, I guess, in Scripture where I see Jesus answering that question most directly, I guess, is in this prayer in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he says, if it be possible, let this cup pass from me. But nevertheless, not my will, but your will be done. Right? So even Jesus kind of sits in this in the seat of Solomon here. I recognize the limitations of my perspective in this moment, in this place, where something is being asked of me that's greater than I have the capacity to of my own will give. But nevertheless, not my will, but yours be done.
Yeah.
And C.S. Lewis puts it this way. He says, in the end, we will either make that statement or God will make that statement to us.
Yeah, that's right. That's true. Yeah, and then who is the you that we refer to when we say your will? And I think that's where the question gets dicey. It's like, unless the you and your will is this God who loves you and all people beyond our wildest imagination, it is off to the side of who God is. You're asking a different God, your will. And so we say, not my will, but your will be done, is to say, not my will, but a love beyond my wildest imagination. Let its will be done here. It's a will that I can't fathom. If you're going to ask me what should I be doing next, I can't fathom what love sees, in the grand totality of it is. So in a sense, that doesn't sound sexy, but I think Jesus' answer to that is, if God asked Jesus what would he want, he would say, I want perfect obedience. See, I don't even want to see, I don't even have to know where I am in the greater scheme of things. All I need to know is what's the next step I need to take. I don't need to know how it fits into it all, because if it's love's step, then it sees further, than we can. And simply show me that next step, and I'll trust that I can look back later and see, oh my God, how amazing this journey you've taken me on. What amazing things we did together, God. But if you're going to wait to like show me how this all fits into the larger scheme of things, I may not even understand how this all fits in the other scheme of things. So if I'm going to wait until I understand that, could be waiting a long time.
I was thinking about the building, the architect metaphor that we were talking about. If this is the pillar of wisdom, that's the first pillar that goes up on a foundation that we're not even quite sure of, right? Then how do we know that that's going to be enough? Obviously, there must be something else, even if we don't know what it is. And are we willing to take that first step or that next step in trust of who the architect is, right?
Yeah.
So that we can look back later and say it was just the beginning of what was coming.
Exactly. Think of those great cathedral builders of
Right.
the Middle Ages, who would have been erecting pillars and cutting stones. They're never even going to see. They're going to be long dead before this cathedral comes out. I can't imagine that any architect sat down and showed them the big plans. Here's what we're working on here. They said, here, we need this wall done. We need this footing set. We need this pillar up. And they worked and they trusted that. And they used the gifts that brought them alive in this world to apply to this great work. That did they have to know what would come after them? They just had to
doing
trust.
their own piece, right?
Do what you're doing.
Yeah, well, Melvin, you are an incredible pillar of this community. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me and letting me be a part of this conversation.
It's always
Pleasure.
a joy.
Hey, Melvin, you just before you go, you do a lot with the Wild Goose Festival too. When's the next fest being held and where? And
that is a very good question.
Okay.
And we are not quite ready to announce that yet, but that will go live really soon.
Oh, okay.
Yes,
great.
indeed.
Great time for all kinds of Christians who have been on both kind of sides of the great theological divide, who are kind of off, have left their own kind of traditions and finding new ways and finding amazing common ground.
Maybe even less than ultra spiritual people.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I think I see one or two of them walking around Wild Goose once in a while too. Yeah.
Well, thank you again, Melvin, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you again sometime soon.
I'm looking forward to it as well. Take care now.
Thanks.
Thanks, Melvin.
Bye-bye.